They fear you the moment you understand what Machiavelli actually meant. And most never will. You've read Machiavelli wrong. Everyone has. They turned him into a villain because the truth he wrote was too dangerous to accept. He didn't teach evil. He taught survival. He showed you that power doesn't belong to the kindest. It belongs to those who understand human nature without the filter of delusion. You've been conditioned to believe that morality and strength coexist naturally. They don't. Morality is a social contract designed to keep you predictable. Strength is what happens when you stop obeying that contract and start writing your own rules. Most people fear Machiavelli because he exposed what they already know, but refuse to admit. Fairness is a lie. Respect isn't earned through kindness. Control isn't maintained through trust. The world rewards those who understand manipulation, dominance, and calculated ruthlessness, not because the world is evil, but because the world is indifferent. And indifference doesn't care about your intentions. It only recognizes consequence. You've been playing by rules that no one else follows. You've been waiting for the world to reward your goodness. It won't. But what if you stopped waiting? What if you learned to read people, predict their moves, and act without the paralysis of guilt? What if you became the person others can't manipulate because you've mastered the psychology they don't even know they're using? This isn't about becoming a monster. It's about becoming untouchable. Let's begin. You think indifference is weakness. That's because you've been trained to react. Society rewards the loud, the emotional, the desperate for approval. But power doesn't live in reaction. It lives in control. When you stop caring what others think, you stop being manipulated by their opinion. You become immune to their attempts at dominance. Indifference isn't coldness for its own sake. It's a boundary made of stone. It tells the world, I don't need your validation to exist, and that terrifies people who survive on control. Every time you chase respect, you lose it. People don't respect what they can see begging. They respect what remains calm when provoked. Indifference is the refusal to play emotional games. It's not apathy. It's precision. You choose where your energy goes. You decide who gets your emotion. Most people react because they think responding proves strength. But reacting without thought is the fastest way to hand someone else your power. When you're indifferent, you force others to work harder for your attention. And attention, when rare, becomes valuable. I've watched men destroy their own dominance by caring too much. They argue with people who don't matter. They defend themselves to strangers. They burn energy on battles that mean nothing. That's not strength. It's survival instinct gone wrong. The Stoics understood this centuries ago. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the best revenge is not to become like your enemy. Indifference is that revenge. It's refusing to be dragged into someone else's chaos. You stay cold. You stay quiet. And while they spiral, you remain unmoved. But here's the psychology most people miss. Indifference creates fear because it signals self-sufficiency. When you don't need external validation, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability is a form of control. People can't manipulate what they can't read. They can't dominate someone who doesn't react to their emotional manipulation. That's why the calmest person in the room often holds the most power. Not because they're passive, but because they've weaponized stillness. They've turned silence into strategy. And silence, when used correctly, speaks louder than any argument. Most people will never understand this. They'll think you're cold, detached, emotionless. Let them. Misunderstanding is the first layer of protection. When they can't read you, they can't control you. And when they can't control you, they start to fear you. That fear isn't born from aggression. It's born from their inability to predict your next move. You've removed yourself from their mental chessboard. You're no longer a piece they can move. And that realization, that loss of control over you, is what keeps them awake at night. But indifference alone isn't enough. You need something else. Something most people are too afraid to accept. You want to be understood. That's your weakness. You explain yourself to people who don't deserve clarity. You justify your actions to minds that can't comprehend your strategy. Every time you try to make someone understand you, you give them a map to your psychology. You hand them the tools to predict you, to manipulate you, to control you. Machiavelli knew this. He wrote that it's better to be feared than loved because fear doesn't require explanation. Love demands constant validation. Understanding demands vulnerability. But power thrives in shadows. When people misunderstand you, they fill in the gaps with their own fear. They project their insecurities onto your silence. They assume you're dangerous because they can't categorize you. That's not a weakness, that's camouflage. The most powerful people in history were misunderstood by design. They didn't waste energy correcting false narratives. They let the mystery do the work. Think about it. Every time you explain yourself, you shrink your presence. You become predictable. And predictability is the death of dominance. The moment someone thinks they know you, they start testing boundaries. They probe for weakness. They search for the crack in your armor. I stopped explaining myself years ago, not out of arrogance, out of survival. I realized that the more I clarified my intentions, the more people felt entitled to question them. They didn't want understanding. They wanted control. They wanted to feel like they had influence over my decisions. So I cut the explanations. I let them think what they wanted, and something shifted. People became more cautious around me. They second-guessed their assumptions. They hesitated before challenging me. Because without confirmation, their fear had nowhere to go but inward. They couldn't attack what they couldn't define. Here's the psychology. Humans fear the unknown more than the known threat. A wild animal you can see is manageable. A predator you hear but can't locate? That's terror. When you refuse to explain yourself, you become that unseen predator. You occupy space in their mind without giving them closure. They run scenarios. They guess your motives. They build you into something larger than you might actually be. And all of that happens because you stayed quiet. You didn't give them the satisfaction of certainty. You let them drown in their own speculation. That's not cruelty, that's strategy. Emotion would make you explain. Logic makes you silent. Most people can't handle this level of isolation. They need approval like oxygen. They need people to understand their intentions, their wounds, their reasons. That need for external validation is what makes them weak. It's what makes them controllable. But you don't need anyone to understand you. You understand yourself, that's enough. When you stop seeking clarity from others, you stop being a prisoner to their perception. You step outside the system of social approval and operate in a space where only consequence matters. Not feelings, not fairness, just results. And results don't care if people misunderstood your process. But misunderstanding without action is just isolation. What separates you from the weak is what you do with that distance. You've been told that honesty is strength. That's a lie designed to keep you predictable. Truth without strategy is just noise. It exposes you without protecting you. Machiavelli didn't preach dishonesty for its own sake. He preached survival through calculated revelation. The weak tell the truth because they lack the intelligence to weaponize it. The strong understand that truth is a tool, not a moral obligation. You don't owe anyone your reality. You owe yourself dominance. And dominance requires control over what others believe about you. Deception isn't about lying constantly. It's about selective truth. You give people enough reality to trust you, enough mystery to fear you. Think of it like poker. You don't show your hand every round. You bluff when necessary. You fold when the risk outweighs the reward. The same applies to human interaction. Every conversation is a negotiation. Every truth you reveal is a card you play. And once it's played, you can't take it back. Most people vomit their thoughts without considering the consequence. They confess weakness because they think vulnerability builds connection. It doesn't. It builds targets. I once watched a man destroy his career by being too honest. He told his boss exactly what he thought about company decisions. He believed transparency would earn him respect. Instead, it earned him unemployment. Not because he was wrong, but because he didn't understand timing. Truth delivered at the wrong moment is indistinguishable from sabotage. The people who rise aren't the most honest. They're the most strategic. They know when to speak and when to let silence do the manipulation. They know when to agree outwardly while planning differently in private. That's not weakness. That's warfare. Here's what most people refuse to accept. Everyone deceives. Every smile you fake at work is deception. Every "I'm fine when you're not" is deception. Society runs on useful lies. The difference is that most people deceive unconsciously, reactively out of fear. You need to deceive with intention, with purpose, with ruthlessness wrapped in civility. Machiavelli wrote that the lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. You need both. The strength to intimidate when necessary, the cunning to mislead when survival demands it. Power doesn't belong to the honest. It belongs to those who control the narrative. But deception without emotional distance is just panic. It's manipulation born from desperation, and people smell that. The truly powerful don't deceive out of fear. They deceive because they've detached from the outcome. They don't care if you believe them or not. They simply plant the seed and watch you water it with your own assumptions. That's the art. You don't force belief. You let people convince themselves. You give them fragments and their mind fills in the rest. And once they've built the story themselves, they defend it like it was their idea all alone. That's when deception becomes invisible. That's when you've stopped lying and started leading. But leading without foresight is just gamble. What you need next is the ability to see 3 moves ahead before anyone else sees one. You feel too much. That's why you lose. Every time you let emotion dictate your response, you hand control to whoever triggered it. Anger, guilt, affection, they're all leashes. And the person who knows how to pull them owns you. Emotional distance isn't about becoming a robot. It's about becoming the observer instead of the participant. When you detach, you stop reacting to the game. You start analyzing it. You see patterns others miss because they're too busy drowning in their own feelings. That's the advantage. Clarity comes from coldness. Most people operate on autopilot. Someone insults them, they lash out. Someone praises them, they soften. They're puppets dancing to emotional strings they don't even see. But when you create distance between stimulus and response, you break the puppet strings. You insert a pause, a moment of calculation. In that pause, you ask yourself, what does this person want from me? Why are they saying this now? What do they gain if I react? Those questions strip away the emotion and reveal the manipulation underneath. And once you see the manipulation, you can't be controlled by it. You're no longer on the board, you're above it. I learned this the hard way. I used to argue with people who baited me. I'd defend my position, prove them wrong, win the argument, and lose the war. Because while I was busy being right, they were busy turning others against me. They didn't care about the truth. They cared about making me react. And every reaction gave them ammunition. So I stopped engaging. I watched them throw accusations into the void and get nothing back. No defense, no anger, just silence. And that silence made them look unhinged. They escalated. They exposed themselves. And I remained calm. That's what emotional distance does. It turns their weapons into noise. Here's the psychology. Emotion is contagious, but so is composure. When you refuse to match someone's energy, you force them to either escalate or retreat. Most people can't sustain aggression without fuel. And your reaction is their fuel. Remove it, and they burn out. This works in business, relationships, conflict. Everywhere power is exchanged. The Stoics called it the inner citadel, a fortress in your mind that no external force can breach. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire and still wrote that the greatest victory is over yourself. Not because self-control is noble, because self-control is survival. When you master your emotions, you master every interaction. You become the calm in someone else's storm, and calm always outlasts chaos. But distance without direction is just avoidance. You can't just detach and hope the world leaves you alone. You need to use that distance strategically. Watch, learn, predict. When you're not drowning in emotion, you see people for what they are. Patterns. Predictable, repetitive, exploitable patterns. And once you learn to read those patterns, you stop being surprised. You stop being hurt. You stop being caught off guard. You see the move before it's made. That's not paranoia, that's preparation. And preparation is the difference between power and luck. You're always reacting. That's why you're always behind. By the time you respond, the move has already been made. The damage is done. You're fighting yesterday's battle while someone else is planning tomorrow's. Prediction isn't magic. It's pattern recognition. People are not mysterious. They're mechanical. They repeat the same behaviors under the same conditions. Once you learn the formula, you stop being surprised. You start preparing. And preparation is the highest form of dominance. When you know what someone will do before they do it, you've already won. Most people think prediction requires genius. It doesn't. It requires attention. You watch how someone behaves under pressure. You note what they prioritize when forced to choose. You track their inconsistencies, their fears, their triggers. Over time, a map forms, a psychological blueprint. You see that when they feel threatened, they attack. When they feel insecure, they manipulate. When they want something, they flatter. These aren't complex strategies. They're survival instincts dressed as personality. And survival instincts are predictable. The person who lashes out today will lash out tomorrow under similar circumstances. The person who lies when cornered will lie again. That's not pessimism. That's data. I stopped being blindsided years ago. Not because people became more honest, because I became more observant. I started treating conversations like chess games. Every statement was a move. Every question was positioning. I'd ask myself, why are they telling me this now? What do they want me to believe? What are they hiding by emphasizing this detail? Most people don't think that way. They take words at face value. They trust tone over pattern. That's why they get manipulated. They're listening to what's said instead of watching what's done. Words are cheap. Actions reveal intention. And intention, once understood, becomes predictable. Here's where it gets dangerous. Once you can predict people, you can control outcomes. You don't need to force anyone to do anything. You just create conditions where their predictable behavior serves your goal. You know they'll react emotionally to criticism, so you plant it at the right moment. You know they'll seek approval after failure, so you offer it, with strings attached. You know they'll avoid confrontation, so you escalate just enough to make them retreat. This isn't cruelty. This is psychology. Sun Tzu wrote that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. You do that by making them defeat themselves. And they will, every time, if you know which buttons to push. But prediction without ruthlessness is just observation. You can see the future and still let it crush you if you're too afraid to act on what you know. Most people predict disaster and hope it doesn't happen. You need to predict disaster and prevent it, or weaponize it. That's the difference between knowing and controlling. Knowledge without action is cowardice. And cowardice is what keeps people trapped in cycles they can see coming, but refuse to break. You're not most people. You see the pattern. Now the question is, are you willing to act on it before mercy becomes weakness? You've been taught that ruthlessness is evil. That's propaganda designed to keep you compliant. Ruthlessness isn't cruelty for pleasure. It's precision without sentiment. It's the ability to make hard decisions without drowning in guilt. Every time you hesitate because you're afraid of being the villain, someone else takes what should be yours. They don't hesitate, they act. And while you're busy protecting everyone's feelings, they're protecting their position. Power doesn't reward kindness. It rewards consequence. And consequence requires ruthlessness when the moment demands it. Controlled ruthlessness is surgical. It's not random violence or emotional outbursts. It's calculated removal of obstacles. Think of it like pruning a tree. You don't cut branches out of hatred for the tree. You cut them so the tree grows stronger. The same applies to people in your life. Some relationships drain you. Some alliances weaken you. Some connections exist only because you're too afraid to sever them. But every dead branch you refuse to cut weighs down the whole structure. Machiavelli understood this. He wrote that a prince must learn to be not good when necessity commands it. Not because goodness is wrong, but because goodness without strength is suicide. I've had to cut people off without explanation. Friends who became liabilities. Partnerships that outlived their usefulness. Loyalty that turned into entitlement. And every time I felt the pull of guilt. Society programs you to feel bad for protecting yourself. It tells you that cutting people off is cruel. But staying in toxic dynamics out of fear, that's not kindness, that's cowardice. The ruthless decision isn't the one that feels cold. It's the one that prioritizes survival over sentiment. You don't owe anyone a slow death of a relationship. You don't owe anyone endless chances. You owe yourself clarity, and clarity demands cutting what no longer serves you. Here's the psychology most people avoid. Mercy is often just delayed consequence. You spare someone today, and they take advantage tomorrow. You give a second chance, and they interpret it as weakness. Not because people are inherently evil, but because humans test boundaries. They push until they find resistance. And if you never push back, they assume there's nothing to fear. That's when respect dies. That's when manipulation begins. Controlled ruthlessness is the boundary they can't cross. It's the line that says, this far, no further. And when you enforce that line without hesitation, people recalibrate. They stop testing. They start respecting. Not because they like you, because they fear the consequence of disrespecting you. But ruthlessness without purpose is just chaos. It's anger pretending to be strength. The truly powerful don't act ruthlessly out of emotion. They act ruthlessly because they've done the math. They've weighed the cost of action against the cost of inaction, and they've chosen the path that preserves their power, even if it looks cold to others. That's not sociopathy. That's strategy. Emotion clouds judgment. Distance sharpens it. And when you combine distance with ruthlessness, you become untouchable. But being untouchable requires one more thing. Something most people waste without realizing it's their most valuable resource. You waste your power on things that don't matter. Every argument you engage in, every person you try to convince, every battle you fight because your ego demands it. That's not strength. That's hemorrhaging energy into the void. Power isn't about doing more. It's about refusing to waste motion on what yields nothing. The strongest people aren't the busiest. They're the most selective. They operate like snipers, not machine guns. One shot, one target, maximum impact. Everything else is noise. And noise drains you without producing results. Most people confuse activity with progress. They respond to every provocation. They attend every meeting. They say yes because no feels uncomfortable, but every yes is a withdrawal from your energy account, and most people are bankrupt without realizing it. They're exhausted, bitter, stretched thin, and they blame the world. They don't see that they handed their power away in 1,000 small transactions. A favor here, an explanation there, a defense of their position to someone who didn't matter. Each one seemed harmless, but accumulated, they destroyed your capacity to act when it actually counted. Energy is finite. Treat it like currency. Spend it only where it returns value. I stopped arguing with people who weren't worth the breath. Not because I couldn't win, because winning cost more than the victory was worth. You can be right and still lose if the fight drains you. That's the trap most people fall into. They think every challenge requires a response. It doesn't. Most provocations are tests to see if you'll waste energy. The smart move is silence. Let them scream into the void. Let them exhaust themselves while you conserve your strength. The Stoics called this the discipline of assent. You choose what deserves your attention. Everything else dies from neglect. That's not avoidance. That's control. Here's the psychology. People respect scarcity. When your time, attention, and energy are freely available, they become worthless. But when you make people earn access to you, suddenly you matter. Suddenly they measure their words. They think twice before asking for your time. They stop taking you for granted. This works in business, relationships, and even conflict. The person who can walk away holds the power. Not because walking away is always the right move, but because the ability to walk away means you're not desperate. Desperation is what makes people exploitable. Self-sufficiency is what makes them dangerous. And self-sufficiency starts with energy economy. But restraint without purpose is just passivity. You're not conserving energy to do nothing with it. You're conserving it to deploy overwhelming force when the moment demands it. That's the difference between the weak and the powerful. The weak scatter their energy across 100 irrelevant battles. The powerful wait. They observe. They calculate. And when they strike, it's decisive. No second chances. No hesitation, just execution. Because they didn't waste themselves on distractions. They saved everything for the moment that mattered. That kind of discipline isn't natural. It's cultivated. And it requires one final principle that separates those who survive from those who dominate. You're still holding on. That's your prison. Every need you have is a chain someone else can pull. Every attachment is a vulnerability waiting to be exploited. You think connection makes you human. It does. But it also makes you controllable. The moment you need something, approval, affection, security, validation, you've given someone else the power to withhold it. And they will. Not out of malice. Out of instinct. People exploit dependency because dependency signals weakness. And weakness invites dominance. The man who needs nothing cannot be controlled. That's not philosophy. That's survival. Unattachment doesn't mean isolation. It means operating from a position of sufficiency, not scarcity. You can have relationships without needing them to define you. You can want success without letting failure destroy you. You can care about people without letting their opinion dictate your reality. The difference is subtle, but critical. Need is desperation. Want is preference. When you need something, you'll compromise yourself to get it. When you want something, you'll walk away if the cost is too high. That's power. The ability to say no to what everyone else would beg for. Because you know that the moment you beg, you've already lost. I've watched people destroy themselves chasing things they thought they needed. Status, relationships, money, recognition. They built their entire identity around external outcomes. And when those outcomes didn't happen, or worse, when they were taken away, they collapsed because they had no foundation, no internal structure. They were houses built on sand. Unattachment is the bedrock. It's the part of you that remains intact when everything external falls apart. The Stoics understood this. Epictetus was a slave who became one of history's greatest philosophers. He wrote that freedom isn't the ability to do what you want. It's the elimination of wanting what you can't control. That's the discipline. Severing your sense of self from everything outside your control. Here's the brutal truth. Most people are addicted to external validation. They check their phones for likes. They measure their worth by how others treat them. They feel powerful when praised and worthless when ignored. That's not living. That's reacting. You're not a person. You're a puppet responding to whatever stimulus comes next. Unattachment is cutting those strings. It's building a psychology so fortified that nothing external can breach it. Not rejection, not failure, not betrayal. You become a closed system, self-generating, self-sustaining, untouchable. And when you're untouchable, people can't hurt you. They can't manipulate you. They can't dominate you. Because there's nothing left to leverage. But unattachment isn't passive. It's not resignation or apathy. It's the ultimate form of power because it removes fear from the equation. When you don't fear loss, you can take risks others won't. When you don't fear rejection, you can speak truths others hide. When you don't fear consequence, you can act decisively while everyone else hesitates. That's what Machiavelli meant when he wrote about virtue. The ability to act with force and precision regardless of circumstance. Unattachment is the foundation of that ability. You've stopped needing the world to cooperate. You've stopped waiting for permission. You've stopped hoping for fairness. You act, you adapt, you dominate. Not because you're stronger than everyone else. Because you've removed the weakness that makes most people controllable. You've seen it now. The architecture of power that most people will never recognize. Indifference, misunderstanding, deception, distance, prediction, ruthlessness, energy economy, unattachment. These aren't virtues, they're weapons. And the man who wields them correctly doesn't need to announce his dominance. Others feel it before he speaks. They sense it in his silence. They fear it in his refusal to play by their rules. Machiavelli didn't write for the weak. He wrote for those willing to see the world as it is, not as they wish it were. And now you know. The question isn't whether you'll use this knowledge. It's whether you'll have the discipline to apply it without flinching. Power doesn't forgive hesitation. Control doesn't reward sentiment. You either act with precision, or you remain controlled by those who do. But understanding Machiavelli isn't enough if you're still bleeding power through your words. Most people destroy themselves not through action, but through speech. They talk when they should listen. They explain when they should observe. They reveal when they should conceal. If you haven't watched The Price of Talking Too Much, 12 Rules of Machiavelli, you're missing the other half of this equation. That video will show you how silence becomes strategy and how your mouth is the fastest way to lose everything you've built. Watch it. Now. Not tomorrow. Now. Write this in the comments. I read Machiavelli correctly. Fear is earned. Respect is taken.